This is the second homily that I'm doing as part of a short series on Eucharistic miracles. And this is a continuation of my educational homilies that I've been doing since last January, going through all of the teachings of the Church. They're available on my YouTube page, and eventually they'll all be part of a book that I'll put together probably. But anyways, we've been focusing on the Eucharist recently because we are in the middle of the Eucharistic revival in the United States. Eucharistic miracles have happened thousands of times throughout the history of the Church, occasions where something remarkable and otherwise unexplainable happens surrounding a consecrated Eucharistic host. Last week I gave 4 older accounts of Eucharistic miracles from ancient history, really, the beginning of the Church all the way up to the 1600s. And this week, we're going to look at 4 modern cases. The oldest of these 4 is less than 30 years old. So Eucharistic miracles happen to this day. And we'll start with the most famous Eucharistic miracle of modern times, and that is the Buenos Aires miracle of 1996. At 7 o'clock in the evening on August 18th, 1996, Father Alejandro Pizet was celebrating Mass in Buenos Aires, Argentina. As he was finishing distributing Holy Communion, a woman came up to tell him that she had found a discarded host on a candle holder at the back of the church. The priest placed it in a container of water and put it away in the tabernacle so that it would dissolve. This is one of the things that you can do to respectfully handle the Eucharist that has not been taken care of or that has been soiled or dirtied. You allow it to dissolve in water. On Monday, August 26th, so this is about a week later, upon opening the tabernacle, Father Pizet saw to his amazement that the host had turned into a bloody substance. And so he told his bishop, Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio, who is now Pope Francis, and he had the host professionally photographed. And these pictures, they show the host, which had become a fragment of bloodied flesh, and had grown significantly in size. It was much bigger, much larger than a host. And so for several years, the host remained in that tabernacle. The whole time it was kept a secret. And throughout those years, the host did not decompose. So eventually, Cardinal Bergoglio decided to have it scientifically analyzed. So they sent a fragment of the bloody, a sample of the bloody fragment to New York City for analysis. And they purposely did not inform the team of scientists where the sample came from. They just wanted them to examine it. One of these scientists was a well-known cardiologist and forensic pathologist named Dr. Francis Zugaba, and he determined that the analyzed substance was real flesh, that it did in fact contain human DNA. Here's a quote of what Dr. Zugaba said. "It is a fragment of the heart muscle found in the wall of the left ventricle close to the valves. This muscle is responsible for the contraction of the heart. It should be borne in mind that the left cardiac ventricle pumps blood to all parts of the body. In the sample, the heart muscle is in an inflammatory condition and contains a large number of white blood cells. This indicates that the heart was alive at the time this sample was taken. It is my contention that the heart was alive, since white blood cells die outside of a living organism. They require a living organism to sustain them. Thus, their presence indicates that the heart was alive when the sample was taken. What is more, those white blood cells had penetrated the tissue, which further indicates that the heart had been under severe stress, as if the owner had been beaten severely about the chest." And then the scientists, they were asked, how long would white blood cells, remained alive if they came from a piece of human tissue which had been kept in water. And the response was they would have ceased to exist in a matter of minutes. Now, in reality, the sample had been kept in ordinary water for a month and then for another 3 years in a container of distilled water. And Dr. Zugaba was amazed by this information, and his response was how and why a consecrated host would change its character and become living human flesh and blood will remain an inexplicable mystery to science, a mystery totally beyond her competence. This same sample was compared to the Eucharistic miracle that I talked about last week, the one that occurred at Lanciano, Italy, over 1,200 years ago. And it was it was as if it was taken from the same sample. The blood was a match, both AB and the DNA revealed that this was the flesh of a man who was of Middle Eastern descent, and the studies conclude that even though the two samples are separated by over 1,000 years, they had to have come from the same person, which is obviously inexplicable. The second miracle that I want to talk about is the 2006 miracle in Tixla, Mexico. Tixla is a town of 23,000 people in the state of Guerrero, which is in the southwest Mexico. It is a pretty rough place. There's crime and drug trafficking and political instability, and even recurrent flooding has been taking place. It's about 50 miles inland from the famous resort town of Acapulco. In this case, Father Leopoldo Roque of St. Martin of Tours Parish in Tixla, he organized a spiritual weekend retreat for his parishioners in October of 2006. And for that, he invited a famous preacher that he knew, Father Raimundo Reina Esteban, informally known as Father Rayito. And on Sunday, October 22nd, 2006, Father Rayito celebrated Mass. That was the conclusion of this spiritual retreat for the parish. There's about 600 people there, and 2 nuns were helping with the distribution of communion. And while holding a ciborium full of hosts, Sister Aurelie Marroquin, one of the 2 nuns, she suddenly paused and she turned pale in front of the faithful who were lining up to receive communion. And according to the woman who was next in line for communion, the nun went back to the altar with teary eyes, and she showed the ciborium to Father Rayito without saying a word. And it turned out that one of the hosts was stained with blood. The host had a moist, crumbly texture, so much so that a small fragment had come off by just gently touching it. Father Rayito and Father Leopoldo quickly talked to one another until Father Rayito spoke out loud, "This is a miracle," and publicly showed the host that was stained by a few drops of fresh blood. And with his booming preaching voice, he began singing Que Viva Cristo Rey, which is a well-known Mexican hymn, Long Live Christ the King. People applauded, people wept, and in the following weeks, the bishop of the local diocese set up a committee made up of 4 priests, and at the time their investigations were limited to establishing facts through interviewing the people who were involved. 17 statements were given by different people who all agreed with the sworn testimonies of those who were directly involved, the 2 sisters and the 2 priests. 3 1-millimeter sized fragments of the bloody host were sent to the cardiologist Dr. Castañón, who was also involved in the Buenos Aires miracle, in the testing done. And a series of investigations began that were finally concluded in February of 2013, so 7 years of testing. The medical investigation involved labs independent of each other in Mexico, Guatemala, Bolivia, and the United States, and these labs specialized in immunohistochemistry and genetics. And these independent labs, they all arrived at the same conclusions. Number 1, the sample was found to be of human blood. Number 2, as in every single other confirmed Eucharistic miracle, the blood type was group AB. Number 3, there were cellular fibers that belonged to heart muscle. Number 4, the sample contained human DNA. Number 5, under a surface layer of clotted blood, fresh blood was still present in contact with the host. Number 6, the blood arose from within the host, which ruled out the possibility that somebody was applying blood to the outside of the host in an attempt to hoax people. Instead, the blood behaved as if it were seeping from a small wound. Number 7, the samples contained white blood cells, and this is especially remarkable because, as I mentioned with the last Eucharistic case of Buenos Aires, white blood cells die within hours or even minutes outside of the living host. But in this case, on the day of the miracle, the host was kept at room temperature in an unsterile environment. And 3 years later, white blood cells still were being able to take taken from the sample, and they could still be seen under a microscope doing what white blood cells do, attacking germs. Number 8, the white blood cells indicated that the tissue was undergoing an inflammatory reaction as if under intense physiological stress, which is a common recurring theme in these Eucharistic miracles. And number 9, in 2015, nearly 10 years after the miracle had taken place, the host was still soft, as if it were freshly baked, unleavened bread. And trust me, hosts do not last that long. They get stale rather quickly. After just a few days, they can sort of taste funny. So that's the miracle in 2006 in Tixla, Mexico. The next one took place in 2008 in the town of Sokółka, Poland. And because it took place in Poland, I'll be using first names only rather than embarrassing myself attempting to pronounce Polish last names. But anyways, Sokółka is a small town, about 20,000 people in northeastern Poland. It's only 11 miles from the border with Belarus, so we're talking eastern Poland, and it's surrounded by wooded farmland. It's sort of a rural setting. On October 12th, 2008, at the 8:30 a.m. Sunday Mass being celebrated at St. Anthony of Padua Church in Sokółka, Mass was celebrated by Father Philip. He was being assisted at Mass by Father Jacek, who was helping distribute communion. And it's thought that Father Jacek is the one who accidentally dropped a host. One of the faithful who had knelt down to receive communion saw the host and pointed it out to the priest. Father Jacek picked it up and saw that it was dirty, and he decided not to consume it himself, but rather to immerse it in water. As I said, that's an acceptable way to respectfully dispose of a dirty, consecrated host. The host dissolves in the water, at which that point it is no longer the Eucharist, because it is no longer under the appearances of bread. And then it can be poured out respectfully on sacred ground or used to water a plant. At the end of the Mass, Father Jacek put the container of water with the host in it inside the tabernacle. Later, the container was moved out of the tabernacle into a locked safe inside the sacristy, and Sister Julia, who was in charge of taking care of flowers and linens and candles and decorations, she would check on the host each day to make sure that it was dissolving. And a full week had passed since the host had been put in the water, and when Sister Julia opened the safe, she smelled the fragrance of freshly baked bread, and she was very interested in this, and she looked and she saw that part of the host had not yet dissolved, and it was partially covered by a solid red stain, which looked like a blood clot, about half an inch in diameter. But at the same time, the water in the container remained clear. So it was all kind of contained in this one spot. Sister Julia immediately called the parish priests, and they rushed over, and all of them were surprised and astonished. And at the time, they decided to keep it, on the down low until they contacted the local bishop. So a few days later, the bishop and his assistant came to St. Anthony of Padua's to the parish to verify everything. And then the bishop he asked to have the host kept in private custody, and so they moved the container from the safe in the church to a tabernacle in a chapel in the house where the priests lived. On October 30th, so we were a full, nearly a full 3 weeks after the original event, the parish priest separated the solid portion from the water, and he put it on a corporal, which is the square white cloth that is used at the Mass. It often will have a little red cross embroidered into the middle of it. And so when you see pictures of this Eucharistic miracle, that's what you see. You see this little half-inch blood clot kind of covering part of this little red cross. And so he put it on the corporal, and it dried, kind of stuck to it, and then he put that into a little monstrance, and then that was put into the tabernacle of the house where the priests lived. And by January, 3 months later, the substance had dried out completely. It was sucked to the corporal, and the linen fabric was sort of fused to it. The bishop decided then to proceed with scientific investigations to clarify the nature of the mysterious material, and this was done with seriousness and urgency and secrecy, so that obviously the test results wouldn't be spoiled. The study was carried out by 2 experts from a local university, Dr. Stanislaw Solkowski and Dr. Elizabeth Sobianek. And both were anatomical pathologists, but they worked in different departments within the university, and so they were sort of separate from one another, but they were highly regarded in their field. Dr. Elizabeth Sobianek took a small sample of the material, which, according to her, looked like a real blood clot. And part of the white host also came with the sample that she took, because it was impossible to separate it from the host. The sample was then divided in half, and the other half was given to Dr. Sapkowski, he wasn't present for the studies yet, and he was purposely kept unaware of where this originated from. In the following weeks, the material was processed and studied under both a light microscope and an electron microscope, so very highly in detail. And here's a summary of what both doctors found. Number one, the sampled material is myocardial tissue, which is muscle that is found only in the heart. Number two, pathological signs such as segmentation and fragmentation were present in the muscle fibers. Non-medically speaking, what that means is that these are signs of a truly suffering heart muscle. It's a phenomenon resulting in rapid spasms of the heart muscle cells in the context of imminent death. And it should be pointed out that wasn't the result of the sample degrading over time. Segmentation can only happen in a living heart muscle cell that is in agony. Third, the appearance of some muscle fibers was in keeping with contraction band necrosis. Contraction band necrosis is specifically caused by a condition known as cardiomyopathy. It's a stress to the heart, which it weakens the heart muscle as a result of significant emotional or physical distress. It can also be the result of a heart attack. Number four, and this one is the strangest one for me, all throughout the entire time, part of the white host was attached to the heart muscle tissue. It couldn't be separated. And the doctors say that the myocardial fibers and the substance of the bread were making contact with each other in such a way that they were so hooked together and interlaced that there was no, even on a microscopic level, way of imitating that, of recreating that. There's no human instrument or methodology that is able to replicate what they were viewing under the microscope. And so that ruled out a hoax of any sort. And finally, number five, there are no signs of decay or degradation, even though no preservatives were ever used on the sample. It had been kept in water and then in the air for months, and it remains uncorrupted to this day. On October 2nd, 2011, in the presence of 35,000 people, the monstrance containing the corporal that has the fragment of the sacred tissue was moved to the chapel of Our Lady of the Rosary in the parish church, and it's still there to this day for adoration. The last one I want to talk about, it's a short one, but it kind of follows this same pattern, all the same discoveries scientifically speaking. And this took place on Christmas Day in 2013 in the church of Legnica, Poland. And so this was during the distribution of Holy Communion. Once again, a host fell on the floor, and it was subsequently retrieved and placed in a water-filled vessel. And after a while, a red discoloration appeared on the host, and the Bishop of Legnica at the time, he established a commission and charged it with the task of monitoring the phenomenon. On February 4th of 2014, so 2 months later, a red-colored fragment of the matter was isolated and placed on a corporal. In order to clarify the nature of the isolated matter, the commission authorized taking samples and the carrying out of proper examination by various competent research institutes. And here's the conclusions of the scientific study. Number one, once again, the tissue was heart muscle. Number two, there's no bacterial or fungal growths on the sample, even though it had degraded over time. Number three, bread becoming the tissue as examined was deemed scientifically inexplicable. In conclusion, the Department of Forensic Medicine states this: in the histopathological image, the tissue fragments were found which contained the fragmented parts of striated muscle. The whole image is most similar to cardiac muscle, with charges that often accompany agony. The DNA tests result that the tissue is of human origin. So we have these themes throughout all of these modern Eucharistic miracles. It is heart tissue. It is heart tissue that has been put under tremendous stress, tremendous agony to the point of death. A heart that died for you, and a heart that you receive every time you receive Holy Communion.